The Burger Court and the Rehnquist Court, maybe into the Roberts, we'll see. Early in the Burger Court comes the most divisive Supreme Court decision of the last 100 years. Arguably as important as Dred Scott versus Sanford, 1857. Abortion is the process of killing a fetus in the womb in order to abort or stop pregnancy. It is a basically willful miscarriage where a choice is made to undergo a medical procedure that ends life in the womb. This, if you think about it, is one of the most basic questions. Do human beings have special rights that animals don't? Do human beings have an inalienable right to life? Does a woman have a right to decide when she is going to become pregnant and when she's not? Does she have a right to use birth control? That is not an issue of Roe v. Wade. Birth control was dealt with elsewhere and before that. So the Supreme Court had already decided that birth control was reasonable and legal and no issues. But what if birth control isn't used, or what if, as it often does, it fails? Then you're faced with an unwanted pregnancy. Those who are pro-choice, pro-abortion, argue that the right of a woman to decide whether or not she is going to carry a pregnancy to term is something that should not be interfered with. The alternative to having legal and safe and inexpensive abortion is to return to a day where women would still get abortions, but they'd go to back alley doctors who used questionable means, where the life of the mother was very much in danger. So in the name of preventing back alley abortions, the argument is pressed up through the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, in deciding in favor of legal abortion, argues a constitutional right to privacy, that it's within a woman's constitutional right to privacy to decide whether or not she is going to carry a baby to term. Nowhere in the Constitution is this right explicitly stated, but remember the implied thing. So the Burger Court discovers implied in the constitutional right to privacy, and that is the basis for their decision in Roe v. Wade. Now, that decision is what it is, but it is not a decision that was made by elected representatives. It was not a decision that was argued and debated in the halls of Congress, the Senate. It was not a law that was voted on, that was signed or vetoed by the president. It didn't go through the process. There were several states that had anti-abortion laws. There were several states that allowed it. But the Roe v. Wade decision at an instant creates legal abortion nationwide, because the jurisdiction of the U.S. Supreme Court is everywhere within these United States, Commonwealth territories, and the rest. Because of this, the abortion issue has festered. Those who are pro-choice say that there are anti-women people and anti-human people who want babies to be born despite the desires of the mother or maybe the father, into poverty, into lives of hopelessness, where a pregnancy is a blight. And that any attempt to interfere with a woman's right to choose, they assert, is in fact illegitimate, evil, and must be stopped. And therefore Roe versus Wade must be defended at all costs. At the same time, those who are pro-life believe that there's another life involved besides the woman's. And we're not talking about the father's life. We're talking about the child's. And while a woman or a person may make decisions that affect themselves When you make a decision that affects someone else, at that point, usually your rights stop and their rights begin. Does the right of a woman to determine whether or not to carry a baby to term trump a baby's right to exist and be born, especially in a society that has adoption? This deals with human life in the same way that the question of can I own a person, the question of chattel slavery, deals with human life. And both sides believe they have very strong arguments. In the Civil War, the South believed that a government that was powerful enough to take your slaves away from you against your will was a tyrannical government. They had a point. On the other hand, the abolitionist and the northern position that any country that allows human slavery cannot be the land of the free and the home of the brave, they also have a point. Personally, I believe in the Union side of this, but I respect the Southern position on states' rights. In the case of abortion, we are dealing with a similar question. Who decides who lives and dies? Who decides? And because the issue was sidestepped and sent through the United States Supreme Court to make a decision affecting everyone in the country, because of that, this issue has not gone away. Had the American people, or as I think more likely, had the people in each of the 50 states been given the opportunity to vote on this question, we would certainly have states like California and Massachusetts, New York, probably Washington and Oregon, and others, many others, who would have legal abortions. And we would also have other states like South Carolina, Utah, probably Idaho, I can't be sure, who would not have legal abortion. And so people would have to travel across state lines to get one. And this would be difficult for people who are trying to have abortions without their families finding out and who have no money. Those who are pro-abortion or pro-choice think that the access to free and inexpensive abortion is as important a human right as freedom of speech or the ability to eat and be sheltered. Those who are pro-life believe that since 1973, the number of murdered children exceeds anything, including the combined death tolls of Mao Zedong, the greatest mass murderer in human history, who killed between 80 and 100 million Chinese in peacetime, Joseph Stalin, who killed between 30 and 60 million Russians in peacetime, Adolf Hitler, who killed about 20 million people. Add all those together, the high figures. 120 plus 60 is 180 plus 20. We're talking 200 million deaths inflicted by the worst dictators and evil totalitarian police states in human history. Compare that to the number of abortions, legal and cheap, and all the other things in the United States since 1973, and what we have done completely dwarfs what the dictators did. This is not an easy question. I am not saying there are easy answers. I am saying that when you have a decision that is this grave, that is this deep, that is this much about people's most basic ideas of life and right and good, to have a court case come in and do sort of a backdoor fiat decision is dangerous to the body politic, and the body politic has felt the strain ever since. If we have a civil war in the future in this country, it will be in large part because of the divisions between those people who believe that a woman's right to choose whether to carry a pregnancy to term is a cardinal, basic human right, regardless of any other factor. And the difference of opinion that other people have that say that no matter how much you protect a woman's right, you cannot allow that woman to end the life of a child. And here's where we get to the philosophical question: where does life begin? Does life begin at birth? Does life begin at conception? Or does life begin somewhere in between? And that is also a question that is so intimate and deep and basic and connected to our primal our primal instincts for survival and to protect one another, that it is very difficult to agree to disagree. In my judgment, flawed and fallible though it is, I do not believe that the best way to make a decision this big for the entire country was through a Supreme Court decision. And I think that we should bring it back to the states and have different states make their decisions. Some states will be pro-choice, and some states will be pro-life, and some states will have some restrictions between those two extremes, and no one will be happy, and that's what a compromise is. If we fail to do that, if we continue having one side so desperately afraid that a Supreme Court decision that gave abortion could be reversed by a future Supreme Court decision, which, by the way, happens all the time in the case of other Supreme Court decisions, the system will break. And we will no longer be one people. We will be people who think each other are evil. We're not evil. We're confused. And we have two or more very different ideas of what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is evil. And it is very, very hard to say, well, we'll agree to disagree on this one, because the life of a woman or the life of a child is on the line. I'm talking about the role of the court. And the role of the court to make a law like that is not within the normal precedence of court decisions. That sort of decision is almost always made by the legislature and the executive. Think about it, come to your own decisions. We will continue with the Burger Court and those after next time.